Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 18 of the Future of Work show. So, episode 18, that actually means we're a legal adult. For those of you who've been following this show for the last several months, you'll know that we've spoken with very eminent guests across the world in areas as diverse as human robotic interaction, future of marketing and analytics, design thinking and innovation, and now the future of HR. So, as someone who myself works at the interface of people and organizations and the future of HR, I'm so delighted to finally have with me a guest who has worked in HR for a very long time, but is also now at the forefront of reimagining what HR is going to mean in India for the future. And for those of you who are joining us, you know that our guest is none other than Krish Shankar, who is, of course, the Group HR President of Infosys and the President of the National HRD Network. So I'm very, very happy to bring him on today. Hi, Krish.
Hello, good afternoon. Pleasure to be here, Shalini, and to all the viewers. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Krish, for joining us. I also realized that this marks 10 years of us being HR colleagues. About 10 years ago, when I had just completed my PhD and joined an HR leadership role, I had reached out to you for your advice on how HR in India was shaping up at the time. And just as we were sitting down today and I was preparing for our conversation, I realized we're actually exactly at 10 years. It was probably November
Oh my
2010.
God.
Yeah. So, and of course, HR has in some ways moved on considerably, and in other ways, some of the eternal questions still remain. So, I really, really am so thankful to you for coming over on our show today and look forward to this conversation.
Sure. No, time flies. Huh? It's 10 years, so that's phenomenal. Yeah. So thank you. I'm happy to really join in, and I don't know how much of how much I can really talk about the future. There are so many people talking about it, and there's so much that's happening. But I'll give you my perspective, and more so being in the NHRDS, and the kind of some of the discussions we've been having, and maybe it's like the perspective of what could be the future of HR for India. So let me try and see how I can make some sense out of it.
No, really delighted. And I know that last year, August, September, NHRD had released their report on the HR function and as it's going to look like in 2030. So obviously, I know that you and many of your colleagues have put in a lot of thought into the emerging HR function in India and perhaps more broadly as well, and what that might look like. So my first question is, what do you see as some of the big high level trends, and what is really changing in the way the HR function is evolving from here on?
Okay. No, it's we've been thinking about it. I think about a few early this year we sat down and looked at what are some of the things, and we did a survey with some HR CHROs and employees. But we also had COVID, which came in, and I think April onwards, it's like been one big inflection, and therefore COVID has really kind of been one of those significant events which have really changed some of our thinking also, and accelerated some of the things. So what are the things that we see as being in the future of HR, or what I see, based on some of the work that we've got from NHRD and other places? I think there are 4 or 5 trends that really come across. Yeah, I think if you look at the one thing that really comes out is we will see more and more companies and more employees looking at questioning and being and this whole thing about what's my purpose, that's going to become more and more important, because I think people realize, and maybe it's partly through this pandemic, but there's also the question about, am I making a difference? What is my purpose? That kind of a thing. So both at an organization level what is the purpose of this organization, and then that's important for people to join a company. But at an individual level, in terms of, am I finding my purpose, am I doing that, so that's going to be something which I think over the years will become important. So that's, as HR, we got to keep that in mind, because people now feel much more socially connected, more conscious about what is happening, and organizations also play that role. Yeah, so that's, I think, one of the things that may be important. The second one, which is really very, very critical, is this whole thing about, and this has been accelerated by this whole pandemic, is about what do you think of wellness? Yeah. In the past, wellness was, most companies looked after wellness. We had insurance, we had something, a dietitian looking after it. We had lots of physical kind of sports and things. But I think that is now becoming much more important. And through the pandemic, people are now looking at redefining wellness. What about mental health? What about, this whole environment of social health? What about this whole psychological safety in teams? So that's becoming very important. So therefore, this whole holistic well-being, including things like mental health, psychological safety, so that people can express themselves. I think that'll be another area we'll have to really work on. The third area, which has really been much touted, is this learning bit, and this whole thing of continuous learning and skilling. I think that's really more so in technology companies, because the half life of a technology is kind of reducing, and therefore people have to keep learning. But in every other industry, because you'll see that, I think over the next 5-7 years, we'll see more companies transforming digitally. More companies will become and seeing how can they become more digital. So there is a digital transformation vector that's happening. There is an automation vector that's happening. So therefore, in addition to being digital, there'll be automation that will come there. And there are lots of new technologies coming in. And on top of that, companies have also looked at, changing some of the way they work. So therefore, continuous learning becomes very important. And I think organizations have to really start thinking about how can we really do that. Another point that comes here is really this, in the sense that our own perspective of careers has also changed. In the past, when I joined careers, we used to say, okay, I'm going to be here in this company for 10, 20 years, those days. But are people thinking the same now? I'm not sure. Yeah. Are people probably looking at what am I going to do over the next 3 to 5 years? And then maybe they'll take another call. So therefore, career horizons become shorter. And with the changes in the industry becoming much more faster, I mean, you can't be doing the same thing for a long period. Maybe in 10, 15 years, you got to, as they say, pivot and do something else. But that's where this whole thing of learning becomes very important, continuous learning, and how, as organizations, we can be ahead of the curve and also help employees kind of reinvent themselves. You're doing something, that's not going to be the future. How can I help you create and learn something new and reinvent yourself and move on? I think that will become very important. I think those would be. I think the last one I would say, and this is again without kind of going on and on, is important, because if, and this is the impact of the pandemic in a way. Yeah, what has the pandemic done? It has made us think about work. It has made us question how we are working together. Yeah, it's questioning the role of the office in itself. And what's going to happen now is, we believe that, in any company, depending on the industry, anything between 30 to 70% of the people could really work from home. May not be every day. Maybe they'll come to work 1 or 2 days a week or whatever it is. But it's that range of people who could really be working remotely at any point of time. And again, it's very industry specific. If that is so, if people are distributed, what's going to happen is HR will become much more, for them, HR will have to be lots more digital. The way we approach things will also be lots more digital. Lots more of operational HR can be done remotely. So the HR shared services and use of technology can be done remotely. And those are the things that will determine how HR is going to change. And therefore, I see the role of, the business partners becoming, we've been talking about it for long, but truly, this could be a moment where they become true partners, true coaches of leaders and teams, and how they help them in their own career and development, and the use of this whole new what I would call as a greater focus on employee experience, which is all about thinking of employees at every touch point, And that experience also includes the digital experience. That's going to be very important. So how do you really craft, look at the employee's life cycle, the different touch points he or she has? Many of those touch points are going to be digital. How can you ensure that they are the right ones? How can you bring a little more analytics for decision making? So the role of technology in redesigning employee experience will be important, which will also lead to a change in some of the things that HR does, and therefore, the role of the business partners will also change quite a lot. So I think these are some changes that I see. uh, I think in all of this, I think as we go forward, the role of the managers in between, I see also is getting more important, because they'll probably have a larger span. They'll also have to ensure that they look after their teams a lot more. So we got to enable them differently and help them with technology. So yeah, so those are some of the changes that one sees as we go forward, partly due to the pandemic and partly due to various other things that's been happening.
So to pick up on from what you said, Krish, as you said, one of the huge shifts in 2020 has been the forced working remotely, and therefore many discoveries happening in organizations. Perhaps the first discovery was that, oh, so much actually can happen, even when you're working remotely. And I think there was certainly an initial wave of, even for people who were very long time believers in the importance of working in an office setting. I think there was this sense of, oh wow, there's actually a lot of work that happens even when people are working fairly independently and remotely. Yet over the last few months, and particularly recently, many managers as well as HR leaders have been wondering, how does one influence the organizational culture, given that everyone is working so remotely and you don't have some of the inherent advantages of, when you're working in a co-located office like the Infosys campus, for instance, just the campus says a lot about the kind of organization it is, and, the openness, the greenery, the values sort of are embedded in the campus itself. And then, of course, the fact that when you're working co-located in the same physical premise, there is so much more opportunity to observe, mirror behavior, and have the tons of informal interactions that obviously they have to be far more intentionally managed. So, just wondering, what are your thoughts on how both leaders, business leaders, and HR leaders can influence culture in what is today a very different environment?
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good point. I mean, let's step back and say, okay, you're right. I think when we all shifted to remote working or work from home, we found that quickly, large number of people started kind of enjoying it. They kind of and our engagement levels shot up. Clearly went up everywhere, all across, because people kind of got a kind of a sense of something new, a sense of purpose, a sense of working together. But all that was possible because they knew each other. There was an understanding, as I say, there was some amount of social capital that was built up over the years, and that's helped them do it. And you're right. After some time, I think people are finding now that yes, I like the flexibility. I like, that I can kind of juggle around things. But there are other things, like there is this blur. There is, the work and home is, the boundaries are blurring, and therefore, while I may get a couple of hours off in between, but my calls go and stretch late in the evening or night. So therefore, that's one of the things. And how do I manage things at home, kids, education, and other things also at the same time, given this. So those are some of the challenges that are coming up. But clearly, if you look at what will make teams work well in a remote world, if you just think, let's say 2-3 years down the road, if you want to really get teams to work remotely well, what is needed? I think 3 or 4 things are needed. One is, I think they need this complete understanding between the teams. Yeah, they need to know who's doing what, etc. So a lot of social connect. Who can I approach for what? So that's number one. Number two, they should have complete clarity in what they should be doing, and their work. And if they don't, then they kind of waste time and they'll feel a little bit cut out. So therefore, lots more clarity about work. A lot more of connection in terms of in some way getting connected to each other, and I would say a lot more trust in the team, and the manager has to build that kind of a trust, and therefore he or she has to empower teams. You got to be, you can't control too much, you got to delegate, and you got to trust them a little more. So those are important for those teams to work. And I think that's the kind of culture that we need to build. And I think, how can we build the culture? I think in the past, the office proved a great setting for building this connection and culture, right? The physical settings where artifacts, the leaders coming together, the buildings, the training programs that you do, the onboarding sessions, the pictures, the canteen, all of these were artifacts which really help build some kind of a culture. I think if I look at it going forward, they will still have to play a part. And therefore, it's not that they come every day, but maybe you come for certain days and ensure that there is that physical bonding, because that's much more stronger the way it is. But we also have, as organizations, find out how we can build culture in a digital way. I would say more presence of leaders digitally, more presence of leaders connecting with people, more communication. So we start building a culture also in a remote digital way. So that's the other thing that we've got to do. And I think as HR, these are 4 5 things we got to come up. How do you think is the role of managers in building this trust in the teams? The role of managers in saying how can they get a great connection and providing more clarity. And that's one thing we've got to start training managers to do a lot more. Number two, we've got to really start thinking of culture in a, how do you build culture in a hybrid environment? So what elements of the culture do you want to get people together physically once in a way to really, nurture? Because then office now becomes a place where you come together, you bond, you ideate, you strengthen the culture and the values. And then that's important. So you got to think of that. What signature things that you can think of there, but also culture in a digital way. What are some things, what artifacts we can do? So that's the other thing there. I think the role of communities become very important. So therefore, I think, how do you, as leaders, how can we build larger communities where people sitting at home working can tap into those communities digitally? It could be in sports, it could be in this, but it could be different things. So therefore, that's the other one that we got to start building. So I think, if you look at it, the culture part will have to be strengthened a lot more as we go into the future. Some new elements have to be built, elements of inclusiveness, elements of trust, etc. And to do that, we got to really think of architecting it in a setting which is both the office and the digital, but also think of the role of the manager in doing that. So those are some of the key things that we'll have to look as we strengthen the culture, because it's important to build those sets of that culture and those values as people work more digital. I think it'll become much more important in the future.
No, thanks for sharing that, because I think it's absolutely true. I think the process of building culture is different in a digital environment. Of course, there's some things which are always common, but there are also many things that are really, really different. Like all the recent research on what is it that employees and their managers are finding works when they are working in a virtual setting include things like having channels of communication with fast turnaround, so being able to ping someone and get maybe a 2-minute response to something that can't wait for, or rather shouldn't wait for the next scheduled call or next scheduled Zoom session. So that turns out to be quite important. Another thing that turns out to be important is employers checking in with employees at a personal level to see how they're doing. uh, I guess there are these nuances which are different, and as organizations are experiencing a very different world, some of these nuances are becoming clearer, that to build engagement in a digital environment will require a certain set of behavior, which is more intentional than perhaps the more I would say the more natural way when we're all, in the same physical setting. So
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to talk a little bit about something that at one level appears a little bit of a contradiction. So, as you said, and all the studies on what the future of HR and future of work and organizations, where it's headed, there is an overwhelming emphasis, increasing emphasis on things like purpose, culture, and well-being. So there's a lot of emphasis on many of these much softer aspects of working, in an organization, and the kind of factors that are inherently motivating. But at the same time, we seem to be headed into what might be either a mild or a stronger economic downturn. And as of course when there is a downturn and jobs are fewer than applicants, there are other things that take priority. And even from a basic Maslow's hierarchy model, uh, just having job security and having food on the table and your EMI is paid, etc., becomes increasingly important. So, how do you think some of these counterpulls of the future? On the one hand, what seems to be an economic downturn. On the other hand, the increasing automation, which will put pressure on jobs, and how will this all play out with an increasing need from both organizations to focus on culture so that they are able to lead without close supervision, and a need from people and this generation itself to have meaning at work? How do you see these different, somewhat opposing pulls play out?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's a fair point. But I think if you really look at post-pandemic, yeah, what does it mean? I think many industries are slowly, coming back to their to whatever, it's been a dip, and I think many people talk of a V-shaped curve or a U-shaped or a L-shaped or whatever it is, but I think the shape is definitely going up for most businesses. Equally, what the pandemic has done is also created lots more newer businesses. Most companies, say for example, most companies are thinking about how can I become more digital? Yeah, how can I digitize? Or the growth in the e-commerce and the those kind of things have grown up, have grown actually. So there are newer businesses that are coming up. So yes, it's going to be a year of, in a way, I would say it's a tight business environment for a year, but one can see lots of green shoots, a lot of newer businesses coming. Some of the businesses are kind of coming back to their full strength, and I think all that will happen. So I think it's a transition, but I'm sure in the next 6 months one would see most of the economy completely bouncing back. Hopefully, yeah, that's what one would sense there. But the point is, yes. Now, why would things like purpose, well-being, and this are become important? Because I think at this time, that's partly because every organization is really trying to ensure that it does its best for its employee. Yeah, I mean, we and this is a tough time. Every organization feels that the employees have gone out of the way to help. And I think the organizations also want to really ensure that they do their best, in whatever way it is, whether it's providing wellness support, whether it is providing all kinds of things. So therefore, I think that's a very strong thinking, that I've seen all across. Uh, Number one. Number two, I think the as we go into the future, when we look at it, I think organization will also start looking at saying, okay, how do I really build something? How do I start getting this team together a lot more? And I think this pandemic acts as like a kind of a burning platform for saying, listen, we've all come together. Now we got to really build on it. So therefore, it becomes a rallying cry for most organizations. And I think we also look at some kind of a larger vision, and that's where this whole thing of purpose and other things comes very important. So I think in a way, that will become more important for us to really get people mobilized. That'll also be very important to getting people focused on the future. And I think that's what also people want. I think it'll become very critical for most companies to really start thinking about the shared vision, about what they see the future, and start talking about it and getting more people kind of energized by it. So this downturn is there, but I think there's also a movement for really thinking about being more optimism. So I think that's one thing that we will have to see most companies do, be more thinking about the future. What are the opportunities? There'll be new businesses that you will kind of find. So therefore, talking about those new businesses, there'll be new opportunities for many businesses. So I think that's what, and as we keep focusing on it, as we keep trying to drive that thing, then you'll find that the economy will soon get back to normal. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but it's like I think this while this is a it's like a kind of as I say it's one of those kind of trauma inducing situations, right? And I think, and if you look at the traditional thinking of trauma, I mean, normally at least about 50% of people who go through a trauma get what they get a kind of a new lease of life. They feel lots more positive, and there is something they want to do differently, and they kind of that's about 50%. And there'll be some who may still be stuck in that, and there'll be some who will still be be a little more hit by the by this whole trauma and all that. So but this time is also a time for us to really think about the future, get people together, and that's where this whole thing about values, culture, purpose, all of them become more important as rallying cries for us to really move forward.
No, I am absolutely, by the way, with you on the increasing importance of this. And just from a pure organizational science perspective, there is this one of my absolute favorite articles is one called Markets, Bureaucracies, and Clans, which is really about how do you get people to do anything. And there are three primary levers: market, which is rewards. You pay them, you compensate, and you reward them for doing something. Bureaucracy is the process, the rule book, the technology is also a process, and that itself encourages some behaviors. And the third is the clan, which is culture, the softer piece, the purpose, the meaning. And as organizations become, on the one hand, more dispersed, and on the other hand, need to move very fast, it is the third lever which actually is the strongest, because that's the one which can enable decentralized working and can enable people to take actions in the same general direction very, very fast. So I completely, by the way, my question was just about what, the counter pulls to an economic downturn and, the pressure on jobs because of automation with what at one level might feel like, okay, well, that's a different kind of conversation. So I'm just going to take a few comments here. We've got a lot of comments. Uh, so Shefali has a question. How employee engagement as a domain has shifted in the virtual mode, and what can one do to improve the virtual experience?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting question, and I think it's something that we're all learning. We're all learning a lot more. I think I would look at three key things from what I've seen. Yeah, one is longer term. You have to really think of, I would say, we were looking at it, the three C's or the four C's, but there are four key things that is there. I think the first one is clarity. What kind of clarity that you can provide to people, because more remote you are, clarity about what you want to work is very important. And sometimes, and that's one of the things that we got to start providing. The second one is this connections. A lot more time people may feel left out, or so therefore, how do you get simple things? Maybe you can say, listen, every day or every week we'll have a call, we'll meet, or something like that, where people know what is happening, using technologies like Slack or Teams or whatever, where you put on what's happening, etc., or a quick stand-up call. So that kind of a connection is very important. The third one is really this whole thing about uh, have some kind of a cadence and communication. Yeah, so that's like lots more communication, leadership, communication, etc. But clearly, a set cadence really helps people plan when they're all. These are some things that I do. And the last fourth one is really this whole thing about building what I would call as trust. Yeah, how do you create a lot more trust within the teams? And that's where the managers play a big role in, let people talk openly, and create and then build the safety, the psychological safety team. So those are at the core of what you need to see as engaged teams. Yeah, that's number one. Number two is really, if I'm sitting working here, I'm going to be interacting a lot more digitally in many things. So if I look at an employee experience, I've got to look at all my touch points and say, listen, am I really, is it easy for me to do my work? Is it easy for me to really, do things that I used to do, connect with people or get some facilities or, sort out my IT or whatever it is. Therefore, all kinds of touch points. Learning, am I getting great learning online? So therefore, look at employee experience all across all the key touch points and see, is it easy for people to do that digital, because those will be key moments that will also determine what you will do. I think the third part, which is now very important, I would say, for engagement, is this whole thing about wellness. Yeah. We've spoken about the teams, we've spoken about this whole digital experience, but this wellness and this thing is very important. Therefore, what do we need to do is the third area that we need to think of. So, what else can we do in a digital world? I think building strong communities. Therefore, you have lots of connections. Building ways in which teams and telling managers how they can really work with teams, and from HR looking at our employee experiences, including the digital touch points and seeing how you can, look at them and see that that's great. So I think these are some things we need to do much more, in a virtual world compared to what we used to do in a physical world.
Very well said. Sanjay says work from home is helping organizations become more apolitical as physical face time encourages a toxic environment. That's an interesting observation. What do you think, Krish? Do you think that would be the case?
Well, it's like, again, it depends on the organizations, the culture, the boss, various things. Yeah. Um, Ideally, yes. If things are much more objective, if things are much more thing, then yes, a typical a political thing would be there. But equally, uh, you also get work done through your influence. Yeah, and I think that also shows your entrepreneurship in a way, because then we are all social beings. We cannot be machines looking at things there, and therefore we also have to inspire people. We also have to really kind of influence them in a different way. And I think that's also critical. Yeah, you have to do it in a non-political way, but the role of influence, the role of inspiration is still important. Yeah. So therefore, it's just that we got to match both of those. Those are good, but we got to ensure they're done in the right intent and spirit so that they don't become political. Yeah. And I think, but your hypothesis is right. If you're becoming more thing, then yes, if decisions are going to be much more based on objective data, then yes, you may become less apolitical. But it also has this downside about, you can, where is this whole thing of influence, inspiration, etc. So therefore, that's important for many of us, and in a way, you don't know it, but half what we're doing is through an inspiration. Half what we're doing is through, people, and I think that's the hidden thing that pulls us. We've got to really keep that going, but ensure that that also is done in the right way and not political.
It's an interesting observation, Sanjay, by the way. I think because, as you know, you yourself were saying, for working virtually, much greater transparency, objectivity, information flows, all these become important at a much higher order of requirement. So some of those maybe forces of political behavior get sort of reduced. But of course, there is then the whole challenge of how do you continue to influence people in the direction where you need to be headed. So I think that's a really interesting counterpole. Anurag, hi, thanks for joining. Can't agree more. How companies contribute to wellness and safety will become a key employer brand attribute from now on. Very true. Sridhar says, Krish, as a coach, one theme that I'm continuing to hear over the past 6 months from my clients is the blurring of lines between work and personal time. You're up, I think, Krish, you spoke about it. But what do you think organizations can actually do?
Yeah. See, I think there is, I was just speaking to a few people yesterday, and I think there is a greater flexibility there. What has this done is there are many people who have, I was speaking to our teams in Chandigarh, and they're saying that about 75% of our people are not in Chandigarh. They've gone to their hometowns, whether it's in Uttarakhand or in Punjab or Himachal or wherever it is. So they're there. So that's number one. Number two, they've got some flexibility. You don't need to really, there is some free time you get in between, etc. But equally, because you because of that, you also have calls which are set up late in the evening, saying, "Well, you may be available." So therefore, there is call that is set up. I think I think that's what it is. Therefore, and this becomes a little more tougher, let's say, for people who've got to do a lot more caregiving at home, maybe women, etc. And therefore, it becomes tough, sometimes tough. So, what can organizations do? I think it's the key thing is we've got to leave it to the teams to set what is the right thing for them. Mandate things don't really work because I think everyone understands they're all in the same boat, as they say. And if you leave it to the team saying, listen, you set up your own norms. What is it? Have a cadence of meetings which is clear, have some kind of a thing. And what we encourage as organization is to have times of the day where there are no calls. Let's say, maybe you don't know calls on 2 days after, whatever it is. So you can think of a couple of days where you don't have calls or meetings, so people have more time to do what they want to do. So those are some of the things that we can do. So we encourage our people to kind of, adopt some of those practices so that you kind of, I think these are norms that teams have to set. As organizations, we encourage our leaders to do those, talk about it a lot more, see what is suited for people. And there are some, like, for example, we've had a chat and a couple of women in my team said, don't do any meetings from 9 to 11. Let's do it anything after 11, and therefore it gives us more time to get things done, etc., which is great because now we know that those are times you got to have. So I think talking within teams really helps you kind of decide what really will work. So more give free the teams to see what it is because it's all flexible now. There are some non-negotiables. You can say, listen, we all have to be available for some calls or meetings this time, these periods. Sometimes you can say, okay, let's not disturb each other. Tell people to take days off, more connections with people. I think those will all help.
Thanks, Krish. I'm going to take you a little bit into the future. I mean, 2020 has been such an unusual year that I think we could spend actually hours just speaking about the challenges 2020 has thrown up because they're so unusual. Nobody would have uh, thought about some of these issues last year. We were having this conversation, and this year has uh, had extremely unusual challenges. But one of the things I want to ask you is about the changing nature of HR jobs itself. NHRD, and I know that you were part of releasing the study of what HR leadership roles of the future are going to look like. There was also a study by Cognizant, very well, very often quoted study, 21 future HR jobs, etc. What are your thoughts on what's really going to change in the way the HR function itself is structured?
Well, I think, see, so what's going to happen? One is there is this role of technology is going to be much more bigger in HR. Yeah. And I think, how do you really look at that? People are distributed. We got to have great technology all across. Therefore, the role of technology becomes very important. And technology will become important in every job, and therefore, this whole technology people interface also become important for HR to look at. As people are distributed, analytics becomes very important because and we're all working remotely. And what kind of data do I have, about my own team, about myself, about our work, and therefore, how can we take decisions better? So therefore, analytics becomes important. So as I see this, I think there will be, and I already spoke about this whole thing of when you're getting employee experience, and now I think if employees are spending lots more time digitally, you got to look at that employee experience more at the digital level as well as employee experience, overall in terms of whether I'm getting onboarded well, whether I'm getting a learning or promotion, but also this whole digital experience. So if I put these together, I think HR in the future will have employee experience will become very important, and this team will start thinking about a lot more about this whole design of digital interfaces and how how we are providing the right service to HR. Lot more of HR can become operational and can become remote, and therefore you may still have your HR shared services to many things. For example, if you look at career counseling, in the past, if HR business partner was involved, some level of career counseling need not be done by the HR business partner. It can be done by a team of HR people who are sitting remotely. So those are some things that we can kind of, once you understand the context, you can start doing it. Analytics becomes important in a way. It becomes, as they say, a COE of COEs, because every center of expertise, you have your rewards, your OD, your learning, whatever. But then analytics becomes the COE of COE, because you got to really bring all of this and start saying, what it is. So those are some things that I think will become more important. Newer COEs and employee experience, your shared services becoming more technology driven, your analytics becoming very important, very much needed to determine, to see how your managers can do their jobs better. So analytics in the flow of work, as I say, or to help people in decision making. So we got to start thinking about it much more. And I think your business partners then play a much greater role in looking at people and teams, and seeing how the teams are working, and coaching managers a lot more. And the last part is this focus on wellness. And I think wellness, and while in the past we had there, but now that becomes clearly a big role within HR, looking after wellness. And wellness expands. It's not the traditional thing now. It expands to lots more: mental health. How do you look at emotional health? What kind of communities we are building? So therefore, you have an expanded view of wellness that will also become a kind of an expanded COE as we go forward. So those are some of the things that one would see in HR. Things will change much more. So therefore, the role of the business HR, and the role and our closeness to business and people will become critical. So yeah, those are some thoughts.
Actually, so I really want to ask you about how you see the role of HR in enabling technology, both within HR, so HR technology, and in enabling an interface of humans and different technologies. So one of the things we've discovered. Uh, Partly through this show and partly otherwise as well, is that each of the technologies have nuances which are their own. So, for instance, we had a few conversations around human robotic interactions, and human robotic interactions have nuances which are quite different from, say, human chatbot interactions or human AI interactions. For one, human robotic interactions are social interactions. So humans tend to behave with robots in ways that, in at least some aspects, mirror their behavior with other humans, like the desire to compete or collaborate. To judge a robot positively or negatively in a manner which they wouldn't necessarily, judge another piece of technology on. So one of the things that is emerging is that each of the technology interfaces has its own nuances in the way humans interact with that technology. And I am noticing, both in your own NHRD report and in Cognizant study of jobs of the future, that there are quite a few HR roles uh, which are likely to emerge to enable this kind of coupling of humans with a specific aspect of technology, which understands, what those nuances of that particular dyad actually look like. So would love to hear your thoughts around how technology is going to impact both HR as a function, HR technology, and HR's facilitation of machines, humans across other aspects of the organization.
I think there's a lot written about all this. I think it's a little bit many jobs you've seen. Like for example, emotion coach for robots. Emotion coach for chatbots and stuff like that. I think it's all there. It's good, but I think personally, I feel some of those are a little bit, a little bit all being done, but it's not. I won't put that in a scale that will really disrupt the whole of HR. It's not some of those are there. But what is the role of technology? I think, see, as more and more technology comes in, I think what we in HR need to do is to ensure that what is that impact of technology on people, and I think it is about how do you really ensure that if there is a little more of what you call as the technology enables or amplifies people rather than kind of controls them. And I think most technologies that we see now are enabling people to do more, and enabling that. So therefore, that's one of the things that we've got to keep in mind. Coming back, I think if you were to look at what HR needs to do in this overall thing of impact technologies, really think about clearly the role of automation across the company. How are we reskilling people? What are the kind of a things? So therefore, it's much more proactive thinking about how technology can be used, how technology can be harnessed. Yeah, so that's strategically, that's what we need to really think about in a way. Coming and the other parts there is technology and its impact on wellness, which I've already spoken about,
Hmm.
because I think that's the thing in terms of screen time, distraction, health effects, all of those. So therefore, we'll have to start thinking about it. So more one area is the impact of
Yeah.
technology on jobs and how do you get people ready for it. The other is the impact of technology on people, and therefore, how do you really look at that, especially from a wellness and using that. So those are the two key areas that we've got to really look at for across. Then I come within HR, and I think within HR there will be, as I said, there will be lots of chatbots or things that you design which will be needed, but you got to ensure that those to create this whole employee experience. But all of that will need to be designed in a way which really is more empathetic, intuitive. There is they understand human beings and emotions, and that's some of the thing that will go into the whole design of various chatbots and stuff like that. So we got to start thinking about it. That, anyways, is there. I think we also, uh, when I really look at it, technology is not going to completely change what we're doing. I don't think so, because I think it is going to continue to amplify. Some stuff will be there, but it's still where we are, what we bring to the table, the role of HR gets more amplified. So I don't think it's going to, say, okay, I'm going to, tomorrow HR is going to do completely different things. No, because I think the core things that we're doing are going to continue. It may get, some of them may get automated, some of them we've got to really plan so that it's done better. So I look at technology in a more proactive, more helpful way for HR. So therefore, experiences, design HR technology that helps employees do it well. Use lots more self-service, so people are much more empowered in how they're doing, and ensure that while you're doing all of that, it's intuitive. It looks at people as people. I think then you'll probably have the right technology there.
No, very well said. I think this whole personalization of employee experience has become a really important theme. And, even some years back, people were much more comfortable with having much larger cohorts, for instance, or even, programs that worked across the board for everyone. But there is a strong desire for personalization of employee experience, which is part of this whole focus on employee experience coming center stage in the conversation around HR and its evolution. So I'm going to take a few questions now. Shailesh Goyal says some organizations are focused on measuring productivity of their workforce and talks on best way to do that management without offending micromanaging people. What do you think of the whole phenomenon? So I think Shailesh is asking, what are ways to measure productivity without sort of offending micromanaging or like being in your face too much? What are your thoughts?
See, I think in the end, productivity is all about the ultimate outcome. Yeah, I think as long as, for example, if whatever you're supposed to deliver to your clients are delivered, then I think you're being productive. Whatever are your timelines. So I think it is about it. It is, I think whenever you look at it, there are various ways. You start at saying, is the outcome delivered? So that's one. number one. Number two, you say, okay, what are the activities to lead to that outcome? Are they on time? So therefore, you really look at it. And then the last part is the efforts. Are people putting in that effort? So I think at this point, if you have a way of really looking at those things, what are the end outcomes, where are they, how are they, kind of a thing, and have a good discussion. And as long as and therefore that focus and good discussion on that really will tell people where we are. Are we improving on our outcomes, our various, whatever is a commitment, whether it's an SLA, whether it's a revenue per person or whatever, where we are on it. Then you can say, okay, what are activities behind it? And then you can go and say, okay, which activities are kind of not really, taking more time, what we can do differently, and therefore think about it. So I think that's the way to really look at productivity, in a way, more. I think everybody's that's in a way, as you said, Sailesh, a non-intrusive way, and look at it more as a way of saying, okay, we are now coming together to look at it, to see how we can rethink it, how we can improve it, and see how we can make it better, and remove any friction to productivity. I think that's the key thing. And as leaders, we got to say our job is to say, my job is to remove any friction to your productivity, any friction to what you have to deliver. I think if put in that kind of a lens, then I think you'll have much more productive discussions and saying, what can we do differently? A lot of time is not about people's efforts. A lot of time is the processes, it's the activities. I think the redesign of that will give you a lot more. And this is a good time to rethink that, and rethink that with the OD hat. So this is going to, what Shality and co, and this is more a OD kind of a thing, saying, how can I now come and improve productivity? What can we do differently now? We are now remote. Is there some things we are thinking? What are assumptions that we can change differently, so that our outcomes are better quality, more, and in shorter time? That way, you'll be able to rethink.
Santosh says resilience and learning agility are the two aspects coming out very clearly for survival and thriving in the future. Absolutely. I'm sure that is the case. It is rapid learning and no more learning at your own pace, which is the basic premise of OR LMS. How do you visualize L&D function in the digital world, leading to engagement?
This L&D leading to engagement. Is that what the question was,
In a
Shali?
digital, yeah. How
Yeah.
do you visualize L&D function in a digital world, leading to engagement?
No, I think, see, learning is completely now. That's one of the most fascinating things or changes that's going to
Mm,
happen. If you look at it, and I look at myself and many others, how do we learn? A lot of our learning is now not really, a lot of our learning is through, for example, some interesting articles I see on Twitter, and something that I kind of up by somebody saying, wow, this is interesting. And you read and you get some ideas there. And I think many people learn from other sources a lot more, and all of them are digital, in a way. I think so. Therefore, there is a little bit of this, what you call this broad learning, which really expands your mind, expands your perspective, gives you new ideas that I think can be picked up in a more digital, and that is more serendipitous, more self-driven, and that's a key learning that is there. Then you go to learning, which is more deep learning, learning that is needed to improve your skill, improve what you need to do. I think there you need much more, what do you call, sharper focus. And I think one of the things in the past, I don't know if you guys have seen it, e-learning was not a great favorite of many of us. Many companies in India had a lot of e-learning, but they never had people doing it. Unless you mandated saying, unless you do it, you will
mm,
not get this. People won't do e-learning. And therefore, that was a little bit. But I think now that's going to change. People have now, I've seen in my own organization in the last 2 quarters that double the number of people doing various learning. So therefore, people now are, therefore, learning will
yeah.
become more digital. But you got to do it in a right way. Digital can't be sitting in a class and saying, no, you got to kind of design it properly, not more than, let's say, an hour of thing, then make them do certain things, then come back again. So it's a very well designed digital learning, which has got some kind of individual studies, some group communities that you build, and some work that you do. So all those three have to come together for people to learn. This community or social learning is very important. if you don't design it on your whole e-learning, that'll go away, because I don't think people are just going to be sitting and learning unless they have to write an exam. They're not going to do that. So you got to create that. So I think learning, the way we think of learning, technology will change a lot. Yeah, you'll see. We have to redesign it, have lots more digital, but great learning through social communities. You got to build those communities, and some work and giving them time for them to practice. So those are things, and then build that loop in. So deep learning we undergo a change. We got to think about it using more digital ways and digital communities to do it. But clearly, this is one area which will change a lot. Even your leadership development, I think lots more digital, lots more coaching, lots more talking to people. And I found that in the last 6 months, we've been able to have more discussions with our leaders this virtually than we could do in the real world, in the physical world, because in physical world, while you could all get into a team and talk about people, it was always lack of somebody coming, going, this, that. But now we've got lots more focus there. So I think there is a great plus to this digital thing, and we got to build on it in a way also. So yes, learning will change a lot. I think, just to summarize what I said, for the broad learning or the perspective learning, give them more free time, give them more resources for people to really look from anywhere they want, but then ensure that they build that perspective. But the deeper learning is where we got to be much more conscious in designing what it is, and designing it in a more thoughtful way, and using social learning at the heart of it also.
Yeah. No, absolutely. In fact, this year, 2020, has been an absolute revolution for online learning. And Uncube itself, by the way, we are also launching a program on HR for the future. So, skills that HR needs to develop for the future, since our area of focus is the future of work. And we are seeing so many new skills and mindsets become important over the next few years. So, it's been a huge shift. And the online learning space itself has some of these different nuances. So it ranges from, async programs where recorded lessons which you can access at your own convenience, at your own pace, to a combination of async lessons and social communities, and perhaps one-on-one sessions. So there is this whole range emerging of, on the one hand, methodologies which reach many people and have the flexibility which some people find helpful, to a deep personalization of the same content. So online learning this year has had a huge revolution pretty much across the board. So I
Yeah,
realized
and
where,
for HR people, just to add on, for HR people, I think you got to join communities like NHRD, because that gives you a great opportunity, firstly, to interact with people, and I've seen lots of young
yeah,
people in Bangalore being part of many of our activities, and they've learned a lot and they contribute a lot. And it just that gives you that extra perspective. You talk to people of all levels, you talk to people across industries, you participate in projects. So I think a lot of our learning will also come by being actively involved in the community. I think all of us have to spend that time. I think just spending, I mean, I'm talking to Shalini now, but I'm learning also. I'm thinking, learning also in a way. And therefore, the more we spend a little bit within the HR community, I think you contribute, but you also learn. So I think that's a great way to really build this community forward.
very well said. Very well said. In fact, this year seems to be a move towards digital communities across the board. So we're seeing it everywhere. Humans are social. So, you know, the digital format is just another avenue of expressing the same social needs. Anshuman has a question for you. Hi, Anshuman. Good to see you here. While some of us older ones have invested years into knowing people or developing social skills, the same opportunity is not now available to the younger generation or those joining now. How do we handle this situation? I think many people have asked this question, right? That what about people who are coming on board remotely and haven't actually met anyone from their team or the organization?
Yeah. So no, the point is, as I said, um, you have to really think of clearly there is a lot of learning. If I look at myself, there's a lot of learning from other people. If I look at myself 10, 20 years back, I learned a lot from my bosses, meetings, and various things. Therefore that's great learning. And I think you also interact with people a lot more, and you pick up and you build relationships. So therefore, there is a great value to those relationships that you build. Now, in a remote world, I think we've got to work within one constraint. Try and see firstly how can you replicate that, and I think that's setting up calls, meetings, doing one-on-one. So do the same, but that the positive here is you get more availability of people. So therefore, use that and try and I would say for people there is use the availability of people, set up time, talk. You know, I think people reach out saying, listen, I want to hear something from you. Talk to me about this. And there'll be people who will do that. So that's how you start building that relationship even virtually. But as things open up, I think this we've got to go and meet people. We've got to go back to offices or meet somewhere else. But that kind of talking, meeting again, hope it's not more than 6 months down the road. We should be able to. That's important. I would say that that can't be replaced completely. We can substitute part of it through virtual interactions. But as leaders, I think we also have to spend more time talking to people. We have to be more visible. We have to also, find out one-on-one opportunities and coachable moments digitally also. So that way, we should try and reach out to more people.
Right. Oh, wonderful. And I think this is a question shared across organizations, actually, this concern of whether how do we enculture new joiners. So, Krish, I realize we're at the end of our time. Really, thank you so much. It was so wonderful having you on the show. I mean, I wish we could just continue for hours, but obviously that's not good. That's not possible or fair to you. But it was so wonderful to have this conversation. Thank you so much for joining.
The pleasure. Thank you. I hope it was useful, whatever some of my thoughts, but happy to really spend this time. Thank you.
Always. Thank you so much. So I hope you really, really enjoyed this show. Krish is such a wonderful human being and someone whom I've looked up to for years. Now, this whole month and the month of December, we have a spotlight on HR and what the evolving HR function might look like. So if this is a topic of interest to you, please be sure to tune in. We have a conversation most of the time once a week, though next week is Diwali week, so it's going to move to the week after that. Do stay tuned. And as I said, Uncube is also creating a program for HR business partners to have the skills and insights that HR needs for the future. So with that, have a great day ahead and see you next time. Thank you.